David walked through the broken front door of the old garage. The sun was setting behind the mountains, and orange light filled the empty spaces between the metal walls. He was 38 years old, and this was his last chance. The ex-Marine had served in the Space Forces for 16 years. He'd fought in 3 different wars, lost 2 fingers on his left hand in a blast, and watched friends die in the cold darkness of space. When the military finally discharged him due to his injuries, they gave him a small pension and a handshake. That was 2 years ago. Since then, David had moved from job to job, always struggling, always failing. He lived in cheap rooms and ate cheap food. He watched other people move forward while he stayed still. Then he heard about the garage on Kepler 7 colony. It was an alien repair shop, abandoned for 10 years. The owner, a Vreth engineer named Torvak, had disappeared without explanation. The building was falling apart. The price was low because nobody wanted it. David spent his last savings on it. Now he owned a broken building on a forgotten world, and he had no idea what to do next. He stepped inside slowly. The garage was large, with high ceilings and thick metal beams. Tools lay scattered on the floor, some covered in dust so thick they looked like gray stones. Workbenches lined the walls, and above them hung equipment that David did not recognize. In the center of the floor was a platform, probably used to lift ships or transport vessels during repairs. It was covered in rust and did not look like it had moved in years. David walked to the back of the garage where the office was located. The door was stuck, but he pushed hard and it opened with a loud sound that echoed through the empty space. Inside was a desk, a chair, and a computer terminal. The terminal was dark. David had no electricity in the building yet. He would need to fix that first. He sat in the chair. It was uncomfortable and smelled like something old and forgotten. David looked at the terminal for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small portable power source. He'd kept it from his military days. It was still charged. He connected it to the terminal. The screen came to life slowly. Blue light filled the dark office. Words appeared in English. The computer had been waiting for someone to turn it on. For 10 years it had been waiting. David's hands were shaking now. Not from fear but from something else. Something like recognition. The screen showed a list of files. Service records. Maintenance logs. Repair reports. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. David clicked on the first one. It was a report from 7 years ago. It described the repair of a cargo ship. Nothing special. Nothing interesting. He clicked on another one. This one was from 10 years ago. It was about a transport vessel. Very ordinary. But David was trained to see patterns. The military had taught him to look at information and find what did not fit. He spent an hour reading through the files, scrolling through decades of work. Most of it was boring. Ships came in. They were fixed. They left. Standard repair work for a standard garage. But there was something else hidden in the reports. At first, David did not notice it. But the more he read, the more he saw it. The dates were not normal. Some ships came in multiple times. Other ships never came back for repairs. And some of the technical descriptions did not match the ship types listed. A small cargo hauler would be brought in with repair needs that only a military vessel would have. A transport ship would need modifications that made no sense for regular trading. David leaned back in the chair. His mind was moving now, working like it used to work when he was in the Marines and intelligence officers would brief him before missions. Information was hidden here. Real information. Buried under layers of false reports and ordinary work. He started searching more carefully. He looked for patterns in the names of the ships, in the dates they came in the types of repairs they needed. Hours passed. The office grew dark as the sun finished setting. David turned on a small light and kept reading. Then he found it. A section of the files that was encrypted. The files could not be opened without a password. But there was a note beside them. It was written in the Vreth language, but the computer had a translator function. David used it. The translation was strange. It said, "For the one who understands. The truth is here. The stars belong to everyone. Do not let them keep you in darkness." David's hands began to tremble again. This time he knew exactly why. He tried several passwords. None of them worked. He tried the engineer's name. He tried basic words. Nothing worked. Then he tried something different. He typed in a single word, human. The files opened. What David saw in those files changed everything. There were blueprints, technical drawings, detailed specifications for a propulsion system that should not exist. According to every law of physics that the Council had taught, this system was impossible. It defied the known limits of space travel. It was something that humanity should not be able to build. But here it was. Complete. Detailed. Real. David's hands moved across the keyboard slowly, reading everything. His military mind was working now, understanding what this meant. This was technology that the Council had been hiding. This was power that they did not want humans to have. This was the reason that human ships could only travel so far, could only go so fast, could only reach so many stars. He sat back in the chair and closed his eyes. His daughter Emma was waiting for him at the small apartment they shared. She was 12 years old. She had dreams about traveling to the stars, about seeing new worlds, about being something more than a colony resident. The Council said humans could never do those things. The Council said there were limits to what humans could achieve. But Torvak, the Vreth engineer, had left behind proof that this was a lie. David opened his eyes and looked at the screen again. He reached out and touched the holographic display. The blueprints shifted and changed as he moved his fingers. Beautiful. Elegant. Impossible. Real. His last chance had just become something much bigger than he'd ever imagined. David did not sleep that night. He sat in the office of the old garage with the portable power source connected to the computer terminal, reading through the encrypted files over and over again. His eyes grew tired, but his mind stayed sharp. By the time the sun started to rise, he had begun to understand what Torvak had really done. The Vreth engineer had not just stolen the blueprints of the propulsion system. He had hidden them inside something else. The service records and maintenance logs were real work that Torvak had actually done for real ships. But mixed inside those normal reports were layers of hidden information. It was like looking at a picture that had another picture hidden inside it. You had to know how to look to see it. David found codes hidden in the dates. He found technical information mixed into the descriptions of standard repairs. He found measurements and specifications scattered across hundreds of different documents. Torvak had taken the complete blueprint for an advanced propulsion system and broken it into thousands of small pieces. Then he had spread those pieces across years of work records. Only someone who really understood what they were looking for would ever find it. By dawn, David had extracted most of the information. He had created a single file that showed the full picture. The propulsion system was a jump drive. It could move a ship across vast distances of space instantly. Not slowly through the stars, but jumping from one place to another in moments. According to the laws of physics that the Council taught in schools, this was impossible. But according to Torvak's notes, it was not only possible, it was simple. The last encrypted file was different. It was a message. Torvak had recorded it with audio and text. David played it. The voice was deep and calm. It spoke in English, which meant Torvak had learned the human language well. The message said, "If you are reading this, then you are human. I know this because only a human would have the patience and the clever mind to find this information hidden in such a way. Aliens think in straight lines. Humans think in circles. You can see what is hidden. I am leaving this for you because what I have done is wrong, and I must try to make it right before I disappear." The message continued. Torvak explained that he was a scientist who had worked for the Council for many years. He had been part of the team that discovered the jump drive technology. It was the most important discovery in 1,000 years. Could change everything. But the Council had made a decision. They would hide it. They would not let anyone use it except themselves and the few alien species they trusted. What? Torvak's answer was clear and bitter. The Council feared humans. He explained that throughout history, whenever humans received advanced technology, they did something unexpected. They improved it. They made it better. They found new ways to use it. They did not stay in their place. They did not accept limits. They pushed forward and reached for more. Torvak said, "The Council studied your species for 300 years. They watched what you do with every tool you receive. They watched you take simple machines and turn them into wonders. They watched you take knowledge and build empires. And they became afraid. They decided that humans with a jump drive would be too dangerous. Humans with a jump drive would become too powerful. So they hid the technology. They trapped your people in these small colonies. They told you that this was all you could ever have. They lied." The message continued for another hour. Torvak explained everything. He told David about the secret council meetings where they voted to suppress human space travel. He told David about the false physics laws that they taught in schools to make people believe the jump drive was impossible. He told David about the trade agreements that kept human colonies poor and dependent on alien goods. Everything was designed to keep humanity weak and small. Then Torvak said something that made David stop and listen very carefully. "I have spent 20 years helping to keep this secret. I have helped to maintain the lies. I have watched humans suffer under these restrictions. I have watched children die because they could not reach medical stations that were only a few light years away. I have watched your people accept their prison and believe that the walls were real. I cannot do this anymore. My own species has begun to question whether the council is right. Some of us believe that humans deserve the truth. Some of us believe that humans deserve to be free. I am one of those people. I have stolen the blueprints of the jump drive. I have hidden them in this garage where I worked. And I have left this message for someone who might understand. If you are hearing this, then you are that person. You must take this technology. You must give it to your people. You must help them see that their chains are not real. You must help them break free. The message ended. David sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the colony was waking up. He could hear people moving in the streets, starting their work day. People who did not know that the stars were being kept from them. People who did not know that everything they had been told about the limits of space travel was a lie. He heard footsteps outside the garage. Someone was coming. David quickly disconnected the power source and closed the files. The terminal went dark just as the front door opened. It was Helen. She had been a fellow Marine years ago. She had served with David on a ship. She was taller than David, with strong arms and a scar across her left cheek. She looked around the empty garage with surprise. I heard you bought this place, she said. I wanted to see what you were doing with it. David felt his heart beating fast. He could not tell her what he had found. Not yet. Not until he understood what it all meant. But Helen was looking at him closely, and he knew she could read people. That was why she had been so good as a Marine. I'm trying to figure out what to do with it, David said, which was the truth. The equipment is old. Most of it does not work anymore. Helen nodded slowly. But she kept looking at him. You look like you have not slept, she said. I have been exploring, David said. There is a lot to learn. Helen walked around the garage looking at the tools and the workbenches. She stopped at the platform in the center and ran her hand across it. You know what this is? She asked. A lift, David said. A very advanced lift, Helen said. She looked back at David. This garage used to work on important ships. Real important ships. The kind that the council does not want humans to know about. I used to work on a dock. I know these things. I know what this equipment can do. David's hands started to shake again. Helen was looking at him with understanding in her eyes. What did you find? She asked quietly. David looked at her for a long time. Then he decided to trust her. He walked to the office and reconnected the power source. The terminal came back to life. He showed Helen the files. As Helen read through the blueprints and listened to Torvak's message, her face changed. First it showed shock. Then it showed anger. Then it showed something else. It showed hope. This is real, she whispered. This is actually real. Yes, David said. What are you going to do? Helen asked. David looked out the office window at the colony beyond. He thought about Emma, his daughter, and all the children like her who were told that the stars were impossible. I am going to build it, he said. The work began on a cold morning 3 weeks after David found the blueprints. Helen brought 3 people with her to the garage. 2 of them were men David did not know. The third was a woman named Catherine, who was only 23 years old but had worked as a mechanical engineer before the council restricted human positions in technical fields. These are people I trust, Helen said. They have all been watching the stars their whole lives, wondering why we could never reach them. David looked at each of them carefully. He was a Marine. He knew how to read people. He could see the hunger in their eyes. They wanted something more than what the colony gave them. They wanted to break free. If we do this, David said slowly, there is no going back. The council will hunt us if they find out. We could lose everything. We have already lost everything, Catherine said quietly. We were born on this colony. We will die on this colony. Our children will die on this colony. Unless we do something. David nodded. He believed her. He had felt the same way for years. They started with the simplest parts of the propulsion system. David had broken Torvak's blueprints into stages. First, they would build the energy core, the piece that would create the power needed for a jump. Then they would build the focusing rings that would direct that power. Then they would build the navigation system. Finally, they would put it all together. The first stage took 2 months. David had to study Torvak's designs very carefully. The blueprints used alien engineering methods, and David had to figure out how to build the same thing using human materials and human tools. Sometimes he would work for hours on a single piece, trying different approaches, failing, starting again. Catherine was brilliant. She could look at David's sketches and see problems he had missed. She could suggest changes that made the design simpler and stronger. She worked late into the nights, her young hands moving quickly across the metal, her mind always thinking ahead to the next problem. Helen brought them food and materials. She also kept watch. If anyone from the council came to the colony, Helen would know. She had friends at the dock who would warn her. She became their early warning system. One evening, a man named Robert came to the garage. He was older, maybe 60 years old, with white hair and tired eyes. He had been a doctor before the council decided that human doctors should only work on human patients, and there were very few of those. After that, he had been forced to work in manual labor, carrying heavy things, breaking apart old machines. Helen told me about this, Robert said. He looked at David without blinking. I want to help. Why? David asked. You're old. You could retire soon. You could just live out your life in peace. Robert smiled sadly. I have a grandson, he said. He is 5 years old. I want him to look at the stars one day and not feel trapped. I want him to think he can go anywhere, be anything. The only way that happens is if we give him that choice. I will help you. Robert knew chemistry. The propulsion system needed materials that were difficult to make. Robert figured out how to create them using equipment that would not raise suspicion. He worked in the back room of the garage, mixing compounds, creating the special metals and crystals that the jump drive would need. More people came. Some worked for just a few hours. Some came back night after night. A young man named William who worked in construction brought materials that were supposed to be scrap. A woman named Sarah who cleaned the council buildings brought information about what the authorities were doing. An old mechanic named Thomas shared his knowledge about advanced machinery. They never talked about what they were doing in the town. They never told their friends or family members. They came to the garage, worked in silence, and left without speaking. David taught them to be careful. In the Marines he had learned how to keep secrets. Now he was teaching others. By the 5th month the energy core was taking shape. It was a beautiful thing, made of crystalline structures arranged in perfect patterns. When they tested it with the portable power source, it glowed with blue light. Catherine stood looking at it for a long time. It is working, she whispered. The design is actually working. David felt something shift in his chest. He had begun to believe that this was possible. Not just theoretically possible but actually possible. They could build this. They could really build this. But the work was becoming harder to hide. One afternoon a council inspector came to the garage. He was an alien, a Kellen with smooth gray skin and 4 arms. He looked around slowly, examining everything. This building has not had activity in 10 years, the inspector said. His voice was like wind through metal. Now it is registered as active again. What are you doing here? David's heart was beating very fast. He had prepared for this moment, but now that it was happening, he was not sure if his plan would work. I am a marine engineer, David said calmly. I bought this garage to repair ships. I am starting a small business. The inspector looked around. He saw the workbenches, the tools, the half-finished pieces of machinery. But he did not see the hidden room where the real work was happening. David had made sure of that. The real propulsion system was hidden behind false walls and locked doors that only the team knew about. You are human, the inspector said. Humans are not permitted to repair advanced spacecraft. I repair basic transport ships, David said. Simple work. Nothing important. The inspector walked through the garage for several minutes. Then he stopped at the platform in the center and ran his smooth fingers across it. This platform was used for military vessels, he said. Why do you have this? It came with the garage, David said. I have not removed it yet. The inspector seemed to think about this. His 4 eyes studied David carefully. Then he nodded slowly. This is acceptable, he said finally. But I will be watching. If you repair anything you should not repair, there will be consequences. After the inspector left, the team stayed away from the garage for 1 week. David was terrified. He thought about leaving, about destroying everything, about giving up. But Catherine came to him on the 8th day. We cannot stop now, she said. We are too close. 1 more month, maybe 2, and the core will be ready. We can do this. So they continued. More carefully now. More secretly. But they continued. By the 9th month the energy core was finished. It was perfect. When they turned it on, it created a field of pure power that made the air itself vibrate. They had built something that should have been impossible. They had built something that the council said could not exist. David looked at Catherine, at Helen, at Robert, at all the people who had worked in secret. They were tired. They were scared. But they were also alive in a way they had never been before. Now we build the rest, David said. Now we change everything. The old human colony ship sat in the salvage yard like a skeleton. It had been there for 30 years, slowly rusting in the harsh sunlight of Kepler 7. The ship was called the Pathfinder, and it had been used long ago to bring the first human colonists to this world. Since then, the Council had forbidden humans from using large ships. The Pathfinder had been left to fall apart. David had purchased it 3 months ago for almost no money. The salvage dealer thought he was crazy. Who would want such an old, broken ship? David told him he wanted to break it down for scrap metal. The dealer believed him. Now, on a cold night when the moon was hidden behind clouds, David and his team worked to move the completed propulsion system to the ship. They had worked for 14 months to build it. The energy core, the focusing rings, the navigation system, the connection cables, everything was finished. They had tested each piece separately. Now they would put it all together on the Pathfinder and see if it would actually work. Catherine led the technical work. She moved carefully through the old ship, showing the others where everything needed to go. The propulsion system was larger than David had expected, but it still fit inside the old engine room. They worked quietly, using only hand tools to avoid making too much noise. The salvage yard was empty at night, but they could not be too careful. Helen kept watch outside the ship. She walked around the perimeter, watching for any movement, any light that might indicate someone was coming. She had a communication device that would warn David if there was danger. Robert checked the ship's power systems. The old equipment had not worked in years, but Robert was able to restart the basic systems. Lights came on. The air processors began to run. The ship was waking up. Thomas and William worked on the physical connections, bolting the propulsion system into place. Young Sarah helped Catherine with the technical adjustments. They worked through the entire night. By dawn, everything was ready. The Pathfinder's engine room looked completely different now. The old, dead machinery had been replaced with something alive, something new, something that glowed with blue light from the energy core. David walked through the ship alone. He touched the walls, the controls, the new propulsion system. He thought about all the people who had helped him. He thought about Torvak, the Vreth engineer who had left the blueprints behind. He thought about Emma, his daughter, who was sleeping in their small apartment, waiting for her father to change the world. Catherine found him in the engine room. She was covered in grease and dust, and she looked completely exhausted. But her eyes were bright. "It is ready," she said. "We can jump whenever you want to." David nodded. "Tomorrow night," he said. "We will make the jump tomorrow night." That day passed slowly. David spent it preparing the ship, checking and rechecking everything. Catherine went through the propulsion system line by line, making sure every connection was perfect. Robert monitored the power systems. Helen brought food and water for everyone. Emma came to the salvage yard in the afternoon. David had told her to stay away, but she had followed him. She was 12 years old now, tall for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. "Dad, what is happening?" she asked. "Something big is happening. I can feel it." David looked at his daughter. He could not lie to her. She was too smart for lies. "Tomorrow," he said, "we are going to do something that nobody thinks is possible. We are going to jump through space using a ship that has not worked in 30 years and an engine that the Council says cannot exist. If it works, everything changes. If it does not work, everything ends." Emma looked at the old ship, then back at her father. "Can I watch?" she asked. "No," David said firmly. "It is too dangerous. You need to stay at home with Mrs. Chin. If something goes wrong, I need to know you are safe." That evening, the team gathered at the salvage yard. There were 12 of them now, more than David had expected. Word had spread through the human community. People wanted to be part of this moment. They wanted to watch. They wanted to remember the night that everything changed. David gathered them outside the Pathfinder. "If this works," he said, "the Council will know that we have the technology. They will send enforcers. They will try to stop us. Everything will become dangerous. Everyone here needs to understand that. If you want to leave now, go. I will not judge you." Nobody left. They boarded the ship at midnight. David took the captain's chair on the bridge. Catherine sat at the propulsion controls. Helen stood at the system station. Robert monitored the power levels. Thomas watched the communications. Outside the bridge windows, the stars looked down on them. "Are we ready?" David asked. One by one they checked their systems. One by one they answered, "Ready." David reached forward and activated the jump sequence. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. The ship began to hum. The sound grew louder, deeper, more powerful. The walls vibrated. The floor beneath their feet seemed to shake. On the screens they could see the energy core glowing brighter and brighter. "Power levels increasing," Robert said. "All systems normal. We are at 70% power." "Focusing rings online," Catherine said. "Navigation coordinates locked in." The humming sound became almost unbearable. The bridge lights flickered. For just a moment, David wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Then Catherine said, "Jump sequence initiated." The entire universe seemed to bend. The stars outside the window began to stretch and twist. It was like watching reality itself being pulled apart. David felt something like electricity running through his body, but it was not painful. It was like being reborn. Then everything went black. For 12 seconds, there was nothing but darkness and silence and the feeling of falling through something vast and empty. Then the stars appeared again. But they were different stars. The configuration was different. The planets were in different positions. The sun was in a different place in the sky. They had jumped. They had actually jumped. The bridge filled with sound. Catherine was shouting with joy. Helen was laughing, real laughter, louder and freer than anything David had ever heard. Robert was crying. Thomas was hitting the console with his fist, not in anger but in celebration. David looked at the star charts on the screen. They were exactly where the navigation system had calculated. On the far side of the solar system. The jump distance that should have been impossible. The jump that the council said could never happen. It had happened. Catherine turned to look at David. Her face was shining with tears and sweat and pure happiness. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." David nodded. He could not speak. He could only look at the impossible stars outside the window and know that nothing would ever be the same again. Then the communication system came alive. An emergency broadcast from the colony. A human voice, excited and afraid. "This is Kepler Control. We are picking up massive energy readings from the old salvage yard. We are reading a ship in space at coordinates that should be empty. What is happening? Who is transmitting?" David picked up the communication device. He looked at his team. They were all watching him, waiting. He pressed the button and spoke into the microphone. "This is the Pathfinder," he said. "We have just completed a successful jump drive test. Humanity has the technology. We can reach the stars. We can be free." He released the button. The communication system went silent. Then all over the colony alarms began to sound. The alarms on Kepler 7 colony wailed through the streets like a scream. Within minutes, emergency broadcasts filled every communication channel. The council had made an announcement. A human ship had stolen advanced technology. Enforcers were being sent. The human colony was now under investigation for treason against the Alliance. But something unexpected happened. Instead of fear, the human population felt hope. The Pathfinder returned to the salvage yard within hours. When David and his team emerged from the ship, they found thousands of people waiting for them. Men, women, children, all standing together, all wanting to see the ship that had done the impossible. When they saw David, the crowd began to cheer. Helen grabbed David's arm. "The message got out," she said. "Everyone on the colony knows what we did. And I have received communications from the other human settlements on nearby worlds. They have all heard the news. They are asking for the blueprints. They want to build their own ships." David looked at Catherine. She was smiling, but her eyes were serious. "It is happening too fast," she said. "We wanted to build and test more carefully. But now everyone knows. The secret is out." Within 12 hours, the first Council Enforcer ships appeared in the sky. They were large, military vessels bristling with weapons. They demanded that David surrender himself and surrender the technology. The colony's human population surrounded the old garage where David was hiding. They formed a wall of bodies, thousands of humans standing together, refusing to move. The enforcers landed. Aliens emerged, creatures from a dozen different species, all armed and ready for combat. They marched toward the crowd of humans. But the humans did not fight. They simply stood there. They did not move. They did not scream. They did not run away. They just stood together, a living wall of human determination. The enforcers stopped. They had expected violence. They had expected chaos. They had expected humans to panic and flee. But they had never encountered organized human resistance before. They had never seen humans stand together without fighting, refusing to move, refusing to surrender. The enforcers looked at each other with confusion. One of the alien commanders signaled for his troops to advance anyway. But something unexpected happened. The enforcer soldiers hesitated. They had been trained to fight human criminals and rebels. But this was different. These were ordinary people. Children, elderly people, people who worked as mechanics and cleaners and laborers. They were not armed. They were not violent. They were simply refusing to move. The hesitation lasted only seconds. But in those seconds, something changed in the hearts of the enforcer soldiers. They realized that to move forward, they would have to hurt innocent people. They would have to hurt children. The commander gave the order to retreat. Within days, the situation became impossible for the council to control. The blueprints for the jump drive were spreading across human settlements. People were already beginning to build their own propulsion systems. The technology was too simple, too powerful, too perfect. Once humans had access to it, they could not be stopped. The council sent more enforcers. They declared martial law on the colony. They threatened war against any human settlement that built a jump drive. But their threats meant nothing. Humans were already building. 5 years later, everything had changed. David's old garage had been transformed into something massive. The broken building had been demolished and rebuilt as a sprawling complex of workshops, factories, and design studios. Hundreds of human engineers worked there, designing new ships, improving the propulsion systems, creating variations and improvements that Torvak had never imagined. Catherine was now the chief engineer. She had designed a propulsion system that was 50% more efficient than the original. She had also created a training program that taught young humans how to become engineers and pilots. The program was full of students. Helen had become a test pilot. She had flown more than 200 successful jump drives. She had set distance records and speed records. She had taken ships to places that humans had never been before. She laughed more now than she ever had in her life. Robert had opened a medical academy. He trained young human doctors in advanced techniques. These doctors now staffed the new colonial ships that were traveling to distant worlds. Thomas had retired, but he still came to the garage sometimes to give advice to younger engineers. William had become the director of construction, overseeing the building of new ships and new facilities. Sarah worked in communications, coordinating with human settlements across multiple worlds. She sent messages through the new human communication network, sharing information about the jump drive technology, about new discoveries, about new worlds that had been discovered. Emma, David's daughter, was now 17 years old. She was working on her own propulsion system design. She had ideas about how to make the jump drive work with smaller ships, personal vessels that individual humans could own. Her design showed promise. On a clear afternoon, David stood on the observation deck of a massive ship called the Aurora. This was a colony ship, larger than the Pathfinder, capable of carrying 2,000 humans to a distant star system. Through the viewport, he could see dozens of human vessels in various stages of construction in the shipyards below. The sky above was filled with human ships, testing new technologies, exploring new possibilities. A communication came through. It was from the council. They wanted to negotiate. They were willing to recognize human independence. They were willing to allow human trade ships to move freely through space. They wanted to establish formal relations with the human settlements. David smiled. The council had finally understood. Humans could not be kept in a cage. Once given the tools, humans would always reach for the stars. The council had tried to suppress this for so long, but the effort had been pointless. It was simply not possible to keep humans down. Helen found him on the observation deck. She stood beside him, looking out at the ships. "Do you remember that night on the Pathfinder?" she asked. "When everything was dark and we did not know if we would live or die?" "I remember," David said. "I was so scared," Helen said. "But I was also so happy. It was like all my life had been leading to that one moment." "Mine too," David said. They stood together in silence, watching the human ships work in the shipyards. Ships being built by human hands, designed by human minds, powered by human determination and human ingenuity. A young engineer approached them. "Captain David," the young man said, "I wanted to tell you something. I am leaving tomorrow on the first civilian colony ship. I am going to a new world 3 jump distances away. A world that humans discovered ourselves. I just wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank you for making this possible." David felt something warm in his chest. He looked at the young man, at his hopeful eyes, at his future stretching out before him like an endless sky. "Thank you," David said. "Thank you for being brave enough to go." The young man nodded and walked away. Emma found her father later that day. She brought him the designs for her personal propulsion system. The blueprints were beautiful, elegant, and simple. "It will work," David said, looking at the designs. "I think so too," Emma said. She looked out at the ships with her father. "Do you ever think about Torvak? About what he did for us?" "Every day," David said. "I think about how brave he was. How he risked everything so that we could be free. Maybe one day we will find him," Emma said. "Maybe one day we will be able to thank him in person." David put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. They stood together, looking at the stars, looking at the future. An ex-Marine had bought a rundown alien garage because he had nowhere else to go. He had found hidden blueprints. He had built an impossible engine. He had changed everything. Now, across dozens of human settlements, across 100 different worlds, humans were building their own ships. They were reaching for the stars. They were free. In the distance, jump signatures bloomed like flowers in the darkness. Human ships, going where they chose, bound for horizons that no council could control. The age of human limitation was over. The age of human potential had just begun. It would never end.